Nazir Daf Samach Aleph, we begin a few lines into the Daf with the beginning of the ninth and final parak of the Masechta, which discusses who could be a Nazir. We begin with a Mishnah that identifies three groups. It talks about Kusim, which the Gemara is really referring to in Akum. It's referring to Goyim who are Evid Avodah Zarah. Also talks about Avadim, that's Evid Kanani, and it talks about an Isha, does Nazir supply to a woman. So the Mishnah says the halachas are as follows. An Akum does not have Naziris. If he takes a vow of Naziris, it's meaningless. He does not have any restrictions. Women have Naziris and they have regular halachos, and their husband cannot force them to break their Naziris, cannot force them to drink the wine. An Eved, though, does have Naziris, but his master can force him to drink wine to break his Naziris if he so desires. And the Gemara is going to go through what are the sources of these halachos. How do you know these three categories? On this daf, we'll discuss the kusi, that is the akum, and we'll discuss the eved. So the Gemara begins. The Gemara wants to know what is the source of kusim that akum does not have naziris. So the Gemara quotes a brisa that learns it out of a pasuk, which is Dabrel b'nei Yisrael, and it introduces the parsha of naziris that says speak to b'nei Yisrael. It means we're only talking to b'nei Yisrael. This entire parsha of naziris does not apply to eved kechavim. So the Gemara then the brisa continues before the Gemara questions this. The brisa continues and it says v'amarta alehem. That's already including somebody. That's to include an eved. That although an eved is an eved kanani, it's really an akum. He's included in the parsha of Naziris, not like regular akum. So the Gemara says, why do you need a pasuk of that? We know that an eved kanani is chayev in all mitzvahs like a woman. So why should I think he's different? So the Gemara says, no, he is different because an eved cannot make nidarim. An eved is excluded from nidarim by the pasuk that says Lasar Isra al Nafshay, and neder can only be made on somebody who could make a forbidden, a restriction on his nefesh, on his soul. It is because he owns himself. Avadim aren't owning themselves, and therefore they don't have nidarim. Now naziris is a type of neder, so you may therefore think that they don't have naziris either, and therefore you need the pasuk to include when it says Marta Leim that avadim of the kechavim do have the parsha of naziris. All right, now the Gemara goes back to talking about Evid Kechavim and wants to analyze this brisa here. And it asks, is it true that anytime it says B'nai Yisrael, it's only referring to Yisrael and not to Akum? We have a brisa which clearly says otherwise. The brisa talks about the parsha of Erchin. Erchin is where somebody vows a certain amount of money that he plans to give to Hektish. And he says he's going to give the value of a certain person. So there are two people that are involved in the erech. There's the one who's making the erech vow. He's making the promise to give the money. He's what's called a ma'arich. And then there's the person that he's using as the amount. He's saying this person's value. That's called a ne'erach. So the question the brisa here discusses is, can a akum be a marich or a ne'erach? Can he vow erechin, or can he be used to give an amount, to set the amount of erech that somebody wants to give? So the brisa says that an akum cannot be ma'arich, but he could be ne'erach. How do you see that? There's a brisa that the psukim that discuss erechin says b'nei Yisrael, but then it says ish. So B'nai Yisrael is excluding, ish is including, and therefore we end up with a split halacha. The guy could be a marach, but it cannot be a nerach. But what you see here, when it says B'nai Yisrael, it's not excluding a guy necessarily. B'nai Yisrael could be including an akum as well, as ish specifically includes an akum. So how then can you tell me that when it says B'nai Yisrael by Nazirim, it's excluding an akum? So the Gemara is going to try a number of answers to this. The Gemara's first few approaches is to say there's really another source here in the pasuk to exclude an akum. You don't need B'nai Yisrael, you have other things. So a few attempts here. The Gemara's first attempt is that it says La'aviv u'le'imoy. The pasuk when describing the Nazir says La'aviv u'le'imoy la'achav la'chosi lo yitama. Cannot be matami to his father and his mother. Obviously, we're talking about somebody who has a halachic father and mother. In akum, pi halacha, his father does not have a status of a father, and therefore can't be referring to an akum. So Gemara says, what do you mean when you say that that an akum's father doesn't have a halachic status of a father? You mean what halacha? If you mean that he does not inherit, there's no yerusha from the akum's father, that's not true. because Rav Chibar Avin says the name of Rav Yechanan that an Eved Kichav Midaraisa is Yerish's father. He does inherit. So that's not correct. So maybe you mean, and the source for that is because it says Ki Yerusha Esav Nasati Esar Seir. You see that the Torah uses the word Yerusha, the word inheritance, when referring to Esav. Says the Gemara, okay, so maybe you mean as far as the mitzvah of Kibburav, that Hakam does not have a mitzvah, doesn't have an obligation of honoring his father. So the Gemara says that can't be here, because that can't be correct here, because it doesn't say here that there's a kabed of vicha by Nazirim. It doesn't say honoring, it just says the father. It's talking about being mitame. So the Gemara therefore looks for a different source in the psukim here. So it says the Gemara will use the source that says that means he becomes tamei. That parsha, the concept of tumah exists, but an akum doesn't become tamei. Even if he touches a mace, there's no tumah. So parsha of tumas mace on an akum. So that would be great, but the Gemara is not convinced that there's no tumas mace on an akum, and this is going to be a discussion in and of itself. So the Gemara says, how do you know that there's no tumas mace in akum? Maybe there is. Someone says, okay, well, we have a puzzle that says describing somebody who becomes tamei mace and goes into the base of Mikdash, he gets kares, and it calls it v'nichrasa mitecha kahal. And Akum doesn't have a kahal; it's not included in any kahal. Kahal refers to Yisrael only. So the Gemara says, okay, I agree with that, but that only excludes the Akum from this pasuk, and that is saying kares for somebody who goes in the Beis HaMikdash. Maybe he is tamei, he just doesn't have this pasuk, that is, he doesn't get kares if he goes into the Beis HaMikdash. So says the Gemara, okay, I'll give you a different source, because it says if he's a tahar al tamei, it talks about that somebody who's tamei can be purified with tahara. Paraduma water doesn't work on an akum. See, there's no concept of tahara on an akum. So since there's no concept of tahara, there can't be a concept of tumah either, and therefore there's no concept of tumah for an akum. The Gemara asks again, maybe not. Maybe he's only excluded from the parsha of tahara, but he is included in the parsha of tumah. So the Gemara says again, no, the pasuk clearly links them. It says Ishashor yitma v'lo yischata. Tumah and tahara are linked. Can't have one without the other. Now, Rav Yaakov gives another approach. He says it's a different pasuk. Linked to the pasuk of la'avev u'imai lo yitama, and it's teaching that in order to have the concept of Nazirus that's described in la'avev u'imai lo yitama, you have to be applicable to v'snachaltam oisem levnechem acharechem. That's inheritance, but that inheritance is being meirish in eved. A goy, an akam l'chala, according to all opinions, cannot inherit an eved from his father. Even if he inherits other things from his father, an eved he cannot. So Xeris Sekasa that says that clearly, that he cannot own a brother. So therefore, he cannot inherit that from his father. Therefore, he's excluded from the pasuk of his nechaltem, and he's excluded of the pasuk of Naziris as well. So when it says if that's true, then the same thing should apply to avadim. Avadim also cannot own avadim, so they should also therefore be excluded from the parsha of Nazirus. Hakam are saying only the akam is out, but avadim are in. Gemara now gives a new approach to the whole question. The question was, how could we say that Bnei Yisrael excludes akam? We see that in the discussion of Erchin, Bnei Yisrael includes akam, because it says ish that includes akam. So the Gemara now answers is different. Erchin and Nazirus are different. In Erchin, there is a split halacha. There's two halachas. There's marichin and nerachan. There's being a marich and being a nerach. So we have Bnei Yisrael, which excludes akam, and have the word ish, which includes akam. I say one applies to them and one does not. So therefore, I can say that an akam can be nerach, but it cannot be ma'arich. However, in Nazirus, what's the split halacha going to be? What two halachas are there? Even if it says Bnei Yisrael and it says ish, what are you going to include and what are you going to exclude? There isn't anything, so you have to exclude them completely. So Gemara goes through a couple of possibilities. You may have thought that you could split the halacha. So Gemara says maybe what's excluded is that he can't bring karbanis nazir. Maybe an akam could be a nazir, but he can't bring karbanis nazir. So Gemara says that can't be what you learn from this pasuk, because that's learned out of a different pasuk. It says from the word la'ila that it excludes Nazirim, that excludes Akam, that can't bring in Ayla. It's a brisa, quotes of Yossi Haglili that says that. So it says Gemara, maybe to exclude that an Akam can't be a Nazir Aylam. It could be a Nazir, a regular Nazir, but not a Nazir Aylam. So Gemara again says no, that can't be either. And because the Psukim are talking about Nazir Aylam, how could you say that that's what it's referring to? So the Gemara says, maybe it's referring to the fact that Bnei Yisrael could make their sons Nazirim, but Akam can't make their sons Nazirim. So that's what they're excluded from, but really they're included in the general parsha of Naziris. Someone says, no, that's halacha Moshe Messina. Rav Yechanan says clearly that din is halacha Moshe Messina. We learned that earlier in the Masechta. Can't be what it's referring to. Someone says maybe it's referring to that they could use karbanos set aside by their father. Yisrael is included in that halacha. The akam is excluded in that halacha, but the akam is included in regular naziris. So Gemara says again, they can't be. That's also halacha Moshe Messina, as said by Rav Yechanan.